All advice given is for general information purposes. All legal cases are different, and you should seek the advice of your own attorney before acting or making decisions. No attorney-client privilege applies to communications on this show, and no attorney-client relationship is created by calling or writing in. Attorney Rominger practices only in Pennsylvania and maintains his primary office in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Yo ho ho. Well, here we are, 540-0580. That's the talk line number. So if you have a legal question, call in. Carl Rominger here to answer your questions. 540-0580. Right off the bat, I'm going to let you know, November 3rd, we're going to have Mark Virginis here. He's going to answer our financial questions while I do our legal questions from 2 to 3 p.m. And, if you're thinking about retirement or want to know about the stock market, Mark's a financial guru, and he'll be here November 3rd. And, of course, you want to get in touch or you want to get questions to us ahead of time, that's always appreciated, too. Just email them to me, and I'll feed them into Mark. Or we'll put you in contact directly with him. November 3rd, Mark Virginis. Sunday, November 11th, I'm going to be talking with Bob Carey on Garden Talk. That's on another station, so you'll have to go to the website to get the call letters and information for that. Saturday, November 17th, Keystone Elder Law. I may be filling in, and I may be attending remotely, it looks like. That's kind of the plan, I think. And December 11th, I'll wait to Northern York County Fish and Game, discussing gun rights and gun laws with your questions and answers. That's at 40 Bremer Road, December 11th, Northern York County Fish and Game. So if you have gun rights issues, gun law questions, you want to get them answered, come see me. And we'll go right to the callers here, 540-0580. Dave, you're on the air. Hey, Dave. Do I have him?
My wife, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. You know what?
Okay.
Somebody turned the caller knob down. Who would turn the caller knob down?
Imagine that.
We think it's R.J. Harris who does it because he likes to cut people off with it. He uses a little tool. You always think that people end the conversation so politely with R.J., but it's just not the way it goes. Anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. My wife had a accident. She was not at fault at all. She was sitting stopped in the road in line with peak traffic in front of her.
Is this her version or a real version of not her fault?
Well, I was not there, so this is her version.
Okay.
Right. But somebody came up and squealed the tires, almost stopped, but didn't stop, and butted her in the back end, in the bumper. There's some damage. It's not a huge amount of damage, but it's some damage. She went to a local car dealer, and it's approximately $1,000.
Okay.
The insurance company who is covering the gentleman that hit her sent an adjuster out to the house, and they want to use remanufactured, which I'm reading into that as junkyard parts, for to repair the bumper. Because they're going to get a remanufactured bumper and paint it. Do we have to put up with that? I mean, the car is 12 years old, but it's immaculate, other than the damage that we just received.
Right. So what you're asking is, do you have the right to demand new parts or that sort of thing?
That's correct.
I don't know. I don't think you really have the right to demand new parts. I think the law says that you do have the right, I think, to equivalent parts. So I would have to do a little research on it, but I'm pretty sure. In other words, they don't have to buy them brand new off the shelf, but if they're the equivalent. So you could run into the problem where, like you're saying, I mean, they're literally, remanufactured but not quality. Right. Or they pull a junkyard part that's rusty and wouldn't really be acceptable for quality control. Right. So
yeah, I'm assuming it wouldn't be that. I'm assuming it would be a relatively solid bumper that they have to repaint. But right. I mean, she went through this 4 years ago, so the bumper was brand new 4 years ago. Even though the car is 12 years old, the bumper was brand new 4 years ago.
Right.
So it's just frustrating that through no fault of hers or ours, this vehicle is losing damage or is losing value. And on that same note, if you do a Carfax,
right,
it records how many incidents and accidents. Is this recoupable?
Yes, that's a stigma damage that's created, and that does affect the price.
Okay.
So you're entitled to also say, by the way, now the value of my car would have blue booked at about this, but it should be off by a few percentage points. Now, there are appraisers that will give you actual estimates.
Okay.
Problem is, I mean, what's this car's retail value?
I'm going to say $5,000, $6,000, $7,000.
Right, and so a 5-10% adjustment on that's going to be what, about $350 to $700.
Right.
So I mean, it's certainly worth arguing, but I'm not sure it's worth hiring an appraiser to do, because the appraiser is going to charge almost as much as the differential. But you're certainly entitled to it.
Right. Okay. Now, another question pertaining to this is she has soreness. All right. Their insurance company is saying that our insurance company has to handle all the medical bills.
Right.
Is that correct?
Your insurance company handles the first $5,000 unless you have more in first-party insurance.
All right.
Then they handle anything above that.
Okay. Now, would they then sue insurance company A for?
They will arbitrate for the value of the car if your own insurance pays the car first.
Okay.
As for that $5,000 in PIP, no, that's just something they all carry and will agree to pay on their own driver.
Okay. All right.
But and if you're full tort, obviously, if there's any pain and suffering, you're entitled to recover that from the other side as well.
Right. Okay. So it just seems like it's a no-win situation. Through no fault of our own, we have a good, solid car. Somebody hits us, and now we end up with something that's assembled with somewhat of a second-rate part.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer. I don't know if Pennsylvania is what they call an OEM state or not. See, I never get into this as it's called nicky-knack for a second, right?
Right.
But I don't think Pennsylvania is required automatically to have to use original manufacturer's parts, okay, like OEMs. Okay. Yeah. But some policies will allow for it. You might want to just talk to your insurance agent about it, and they may be able to tell you. I mean, they'll be upfront with you and say, what's my policy say on this?
Right.
But yeah, I don't think that's the answer. So unless somebody out there in the insurance industry knows the answer, I think there's a few states that do require insurance companies, if you want them to provide the OEM parts, which are like the original manufactured equipment.
Right.
I think that stands for original equipment manufacturer or something like that, meaning that it's not an aftermarket part that could have been made by anybody. It's the same bumper that would have originally been attached to that car. But an OEM part can still be refurbished.
Right.
So,
what did you say that was called? Stigma what? Stigma damage?
Stigma value.
Stigma value.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Once you know the car's been in an accident, and even though it's allegedly repaired, you still go, well, what if they didn't miss something, right? That's the stigma. And the other way stigma values come up, two other great ones is there's a suicide in a house, right? Now, it's not that I care if somebody killed themselves in the house, but some buyers just won't buy a house, right, where somebody killed themselves. So we call that a stigma value. And then the other one is when there's an environmental problem. So if the oil company comes and pumps 5,000 gallons of oil into your basement by mistake because the pump keeps requesting, the auto dialer keeps asking for more, then you do the environmental cleanup and everybody's happy except somebody goes, well, what if some of that oil seeps back up under the foundation and I'm found out that I need to do an environmental cleanup as the subsequent owner. So you have to disclose it and I'm going to pay less for it. With car accidents, in the old days, nobody knew what they were getting, right? And with Carfax now, that directly changes the value. So I know that, for instance, on eBay now, when you buy a car, they automatically will give you the Carfax.
Sure.
And that lowered, once they started doing that automatically, that started lowering the auction values of the cars because, imagine that, the average buyer had more information and therefore they tended to bid a little less when there was problems in the title history.
Oh, absolutely. You see a car that has 3 accidents and you shy away from it, but they might have been just something minor, but they still raise a red flag. Right,
exactly. So that is a legitimate value that you're certainly entitled to compensation for. The problem is, and I had a guy I represented a few years back who actually did it for a living, and he's in and out of Carlisle because of the car show. I think he comes in just during the car shows. But he had told me, that's the one downside is, if you have a $100,000 Mercedes and you get a stigma value of say 8% on it, well, it's $8,000. You pay him $350 for the report. It seems like a great swing. If you have a $5,000 car and he writes a report for $350 that says you've lost $250,
right?
It really wasn't worth your time.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, man. Take care.
Have happy hunting.
Hey, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
540-0580. See you after the break. Oh, boy. 540-0580. Carl Rominger here answering your legal questions. Keep throwing them at me. John, you have a question about POAs?
Yes, this is Jim.
Oh, Jim, okay.
Okay, I have a question about disability.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I went to talk to a lawyer, and I had a question about, just the general information, and I don't understand, like, if you're planning on going on it, do you go to a doctor, or how does that really work?
For a power of attorney or for disability? You mean for disability?
For a disability.
Well, if you're going to go on disability, if you have a disability insurance policy, okay, then you would follow whatever that policy requires. If you're talking about Social Security disability,
right.
I think you do have to find a medical doctor that's going to say you're disabled and then apply. If you go online to Social Security Administration's website or you go to your local Social Security office, you'll be able to find the necessary forms, which will tell you what you need.
Okay. When does a lawyer, get into it?
We usually get involved after you've been denied. And there is a joke that Social Security disability is like denied, granted, so that most people who are on it were denied through some initial reviews.
Wow.
Now, the Dickinson School of Law does have a disability law clinic that provides free representation in Social Security matters.
Wow.
So.
Do they always deny the
not always, no.
The first time?
Not always. No, not 100%, no. But the point is, even if you're denied, you apply yourself the first time, and if you get in, congratulations. And if you don't, then you definitely want to see a lawyer. But because here in central Pennsylvania, where are you located?
Harrisburg.
Yeah, so you can contact the Dickinson School of Law, and they'll get you in touch with their disability law clinic, and you're within their purview. So we have a great resource in central Pennsylvania that way.
The lady said that you had to make under you had to be under $1,000 net or gross.
Yeah, there's a very low income limit. Because if you're making money, then you're probably not disabled.
Right. But if you have a disability and you're not doing very well, and there are a lot of people that work and they're having a hard time, and maybe I had
a client, real nice guy. In fact, he still lives down in Gettysburg, and he has a condition where his hands get literally. I don't know how to describe it, but he can't use his hands or feet. The skin gets raw and peels off.
Brother.
So he works, and he's on disability, and most of the time he doesn't get a disability check because he has to report his monthly income, and it exceeds his allowance, and they just reduce it.
Okay.
But when he has an outbreak of whatever the skin condition is, and he can't work for 2 months, then the disability kicks back in.
Wow.
So. I always thought that's an example of a guy who's not milking the system. He's trying to work, and when he legitimately can't work, he's got a safety net so he doesn't have to, go bankrupt and lose his apartment, that sort of thing. But at the same time, he can still work, a pretty menial job pretty hard the rest of the time.
And there's only a certain amount of money he can get, like you just said.
Before he knocks the disability down, but he doesn't have a problem with that,
Right.
And that's my point. So and that's why the system works like that, because it's not designed to kick you off just because you could work a little bit.
Do you always get medical insurance when you go on it, or how does that work?
No, you'd have to apply separately through the welfare department for medical insurance.
Okay.
Whether you automatically qualify when you're on it or not, I don't think the answer is yes.
Okay.
Because there's probably some other prerequisites, but the long and short of it, I would imagine if you're on disability income, you're going to be likely to qualify. But I think you've just about exhausted my knowledge of this area. I would strongly recommend you go to Social Security Administration, get the paperwork, and apply, and go see a doctor in the meantime to get a diagnosis, obviously.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Take care, man.
Bye.
540-0580. Carl Rominger here answering your legal questions. I know how I goofed that up. See, I hit the wrong button. I had the wrong guy. So that was Jim on disability. John, you want to talk about a POA?
Yes. My wife and I are both in our late 60s. What we own, the major assets are in both names. Can you think of any reason why we would benefit by having POAs for each other?
Yes. The benefit of having a POA for each other is if one of you is in a coma or otherwise incapacitated and something comes up, and I don't mean anything, but something, a retirement check only in one name or a refund or even a class action suit, somehow you get a $422 check, the other party will be able to negotiate it or do things with it.
Okay.
And that's the sole. I mean, if you guys are true, if everybody's on every account, everything owned together,
yes,
you may never need it. But I can think of cases where, and I'll just give you an example. Everything was joint, but then there was one check for $300 and some to the one spouse.
Okay.
And I remember that, and my great legal advice was we can get a guardianship and negotiate the check, but it's more expensive to do that. So the only other option is just let the check, rot and hope they get better and be able to negotiate it. Or go to your local small town bank where you already have an account and wink, wink, nod, nod, just deposit it. And a lot of times the teller, but that's not real legal advice, is it?
Right.
But that can solve those situations. The other reason is while you're doing your power of attorney, you should be doing a living will.
We have that.
Which is your medical power of attorney as well.
Okay,
and that's important because that helps, the doctors be more confident about who's in charge.
Right. Well, we have living wills for we have living wills for ourselves, so that's covered.
And after the Ted Williams thing, we can also do documents about whether they can freeze your head or not as well.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, thank you very much for the info. Oh, also, could you answer this?
Yeah.
I'd hate to see this happen, but between now and Election Day, what if something were to happen to Mr. Rominger that would render him unable to fulfill the situation? And how about after the election if he were to win?
Well, if you mean...
Did I say Romney? Yeah.
Yeah, Romney. If Romney like falls into a coma...
Whatever,
gets voted in.
Right.
I think if he I think at the time he's sworn in, it's all that matters.
Okay, so any time between now and January 20th, Ryan would not become the fill-in?
I don't think so because he's not the president yet. Does that make sense? He's elected, president-elect,
right,
but he's not sworn in.
Right.
And so I think right up until the very moment of swearing in, his competency would be at issue right up until then.
Uh-huh.
I think.
Okay.
I think.
I was just curious. I certainly hope it doesn't happen, but I mean, as far as the inability to serve.
Here's the better question, and then let me just go into this for 1 second while I got you. We have this little storm that may be coming, and it may be a fizzle or it may be huge.
Right.
If it's huge and it inundates all the big East Coast cities and they're all swamped down, will we see a week from Tuesday any need to extend how long the polls are open?
Yeah, really.
If Philadelphia is under 2 feet of water, I have a feeling that the federal court may extend the voting deadlines, which is and there's nothing wrong with doing that because inherently, I mean, we'd all agree that if a city was knocked over in an earthquake during the day of the election, we certainly give people extra time.
Right.
But then the more interesting question will be, I think, is how the federal government responds, because I think a big storm with lots of devastation, but which is handled very effectively, is going to look really good for the president in that short window.
Right.
And on the other hand, if it looks kind of like a Katrina-type situation where everybody's just waiting around and nothing seems to be getting better, that's probably going to kill Obama faster than anything else in terms of the electoral vote.
Or power failure. I mean, just a power failure that lasts 2 weeks would be really bad,
So,
okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
540-0580. Maybe nature is going to pick the next president. Doug, you're on WHP 580 with attorney Carl Rominger. What's going on?
Good afternoon, Carl. We own a retail store in Carlisle with a surveillance camera system, and it works pretty well.
Uh-huh.
It covers the store and the parking lot area. Am I under any obligation to let the public know that there's a system in operation?
I don't believe so. Now, people like to do that, and for the particular reason that it tends to, like a sort of, I'm laughing about it, right? But for some reason, some people even just put up a sign that says there is cameras when there are none.
Yeah, sure.
Because it dissuades the public from wanting to steal. On the other hand, if you're not really overly concerned about it, there's no requirement. Now, if you're recording sound, that's a separate story.
No, I wouldn't. But there are cars, and the highway, the main passes the building, and I also catch cars that aren't coming to the parking lot.
Yeah, no expectation of privacy in the public. In other words, I can take my camera and drive up and down the street and film you and your kids on your bicycles and film everybody at the park and do all these things in public because there's no expectation.
Sure.
Now, if I just follow one person around with a camera all day, I might become I might be guilty of harassment, or I might just be a paparazzi, right? There's this fine line there.
Sure.
But my point on this is just there's no, as long as there's no expectation. Now, here's the other one. If you had cameras in the dressing rooms or you had cameras in the bathroom, that's where you'd run into problems because there's a reasonable expectation of privacy in that area.
Sure, I got you. In recent weeks, a couple of fellows decided to do a little extra shopping.
Yeah.
And I caught them on camera. The state police visited. The state police agreed that they were shoplifting, but we were unable to catch them. The state police put a report in the newspaper with this narrative that described the guys. Now, my follow-on question is, can I take that state police narrative and repeat it in the paper?
Yeah, I think you could.
With the hope of someone saying, "Oh, I know that guy who dresses like this and that."
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, as long as I don't have a photo of them, I'm all right.
Well, I mean, if you have you could put a photo of them up as long as it's true.
Well, the state police told me not to because they're not guilty until they get to the court system.
It's true they're not guilty of a crime under the law, but is it defamation to say that they stole something from you if they did? And the answer is no. But the dilemma is if you publicize it, you have to be right. Right,
but if I publicize the narrative...
Right, I believe, state police are investigating, yada, 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 now. Do you ever notice how the newspaper writes it? According to state police reports, or according to the state police. So the newspaper just recites what the state police said, and that way the improper is we didn't do any independent investigation. We're just repeating what the state police said.
Okay, so I could do that at my expense just to keep that article or that narrative running.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
now,
great.
At a certain point, you got to figure out what the cost-to-value ratio is.
Well, sure. I mean, and it's not a lot of money, but it's the principle of the thing. I mean, I have to work for this stuff. Let those guys go work for this stuff.
Right.
That's my whole. If they had asked me for it, I probably would have given it to them. But it just gets, it hits on the personal side of us.
Oh, I understand that. Of course, if you take it too personally, it would have driven Sam Walton nuts, huh?
Yeah.
All right, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for the help.
All right. We got to go to break again here. 540-0580. Carl Rominger answering your legal questions. Welcome back. Well, let's see. Did you just hear the news, right? The president's plotting and planning his disaster response plan. The Republican governor, on the other hand, is plotting and planning his. So get ready, folks. Whatever this storm dumps or doesn't dump or whatever it does or doesn't do, everybody's going to be claiming credit for saving you. All right. I'm a poet. Doug. No, not Doug. Jay.
Yes, Carl. Just calling in response to your question on the presidential election, how things work. First of all, I hope most people know they don't vote for president. They vote for electors who are slated to vote for whoever. But the electors are free to really vote anybody they want to. They could vote for Carl Rominger as long as you're over 35.
Right.
And they meet in December, mid-December, in state capitals to cast their ballots. Long and short, and then in January, early January, the people elected to the presidency and vice presidency are certified in Washington by the Congress. So, if they are certified, if Romney and Ryan are certified as president-elect and vice president-elect, or essentially if the ballots have been cast by the electors, making them that, then if anything happens to Romney, then Ryan becomes the president-elect.
But I assume if anything happens to Romney, that doesn't mean temporary incapacity. It means permanent incapacity.
Well, I mean temporary and what? There's a 25th Amendment which deals with a lot of that stuff in the presidency. Give me temporary incapacity.
Falls into a coma, but the doctor thinks he'll be out of it in 10 days.
Well, there's once he's certified, I'm not sure.
Right. That's why I'm not
sure. But again,
either.
the electors up until that point can decide. Well, we better vote for Ryan.
Right. So theoretically, I mean, let's talk about a scenario, right? Let's say the electors are all up there, and all four of the candidates just disappear. They're drawn up into the alien mothership. Then they can vote for anybody they want, right?
Yeah, they could do it. They have done it. There are people that have voted for. I think Bear Bryant once got a vote. Actually, there was a TV when I was a kid. And this is before the 25th Amendment, which dealt with presidential succession. And at that time, if the president died, the vice president moved up, and there was no vice president. But this was a thing, there was like a drama about a presidential election where a guy got elected president-elect, and actually died before he was announced to be president-elect. And there was call it a conspiracy, if you want, in the drama to keep it from the press, not to tell anybody that he actually died, so that everybody would assume they were voting for him when essentially they were putting the guy they voted for vice president into office. But they didn't announce the fact that the guy died before, before the polling, the electoral polling took place. I think the Electoral College is very outmoded, and my friend Charlie Greenwald, who I talked to on your station this week, thinks it still serves a purpose, but what it is, I don't know. I'll have to talk to him.
Well, there's still a theory that we're not really voting. Well, let's just go back way back to the day, right? We didn't even vote for our own senators in the day, right? The state legislators picked them.
Right.
And so the original theory of federalism was really, I think you were more in a straight line democracy with your state and less out of the loop with the federal government as an individual voter. Or more out of the loop as an individual voter, and that was because the federal government's really a creature of the states in some respects. But that's the interesting question, where that balances out.
I'm very much, I'm not going to say opposed to states' rights. I will say a federalist, but I think my friend would tell you that if you didn't have the Electoral College, the smaller states, if it was a simple popular vote. Mm-hmm. The smaller states would be ignored as far. But for today, they go into certain states, but most politicking is not done so much in a personal. I mean, it's really all sound bites and
I know,
and TV.
But the other thing is, and I do worry about this, which is if it was just a true straight line vote, right? I mean, all you would have to do is win a couple of the major population centers, and then that just ends it.
Well. But actually, technically, again, just as people understand, they are voting for people that have said they'll vote for, but are not legally committed to voting for anybody but who they want to, who's qualified in the Constitution to be president. And if you look back, you will see some, I forget the last one, but somebody threw somebody in there,
So wait, this is even better. I'm gonna turn this around on Durgan for a second, because Durgan says, well, how can nobody know who they're voting for and not be decided? And the answer is what you're basically saying is everybody knows that they're voting for somebody who kind of said he's going to vote for somebody or has promised up and down. But how much do you really know about the slate of electors that you're voting for? In other words, I'd be curious to see if anybody actually knows the name of the elector they're voting for, and what their history is, and what the likelihood of them carrying out their promise.
They're party hacks. What I call hacks. Anybody who's too close to a party to me is a hack.
Party hacks, right?
They're party people. They probably gone to conventions and voted that same party all their lives. And I do recall, and I think it was when Reagan could have been 1968 or 1976 is more likely, when Ford and Carter ran, and Ford had defeated Reagan in a very close Republican primary.
Right.
And actually, a couple people, maybe one or two, actually voted for Reagan. Reagan did get some electoral votes. It's never swayed the election, but theoretically you are not voting for the president. You are simply voting for a slate of electors who have pledged to support a president. But I don't think that you could force them legally to vote for that person, cast their electoral ballot for that person.
Right.
And I'd be glad to hear from anybody who's really an expert on constitutional law.
All right, Jay.
All right, take it easy.
Thanks.
Bye.
Interesting stuff. 540-0580. Doug.
Hi, Carl. I have a question and a comment. Nobody I know has need to a legal answer on this question. It's just my morbid curiosity.
Okay.
As I understand the definition of prostitution, it's the exchange of money for sexual favors.
That's basically the legal definition for sexual gratification, let's call it.
Okay, what if the third party involved? Say, I take my son to the bunny ranch and I pay a prostitute to, let's say, show him the ropes. is that still prostitution? I'm not buying the services for myself.
Well, you're aiding and abetting and conspiring to prostitution. So you're an accessory and conspiring. But in Nevada and at the Bunny Ranch, it's something you can do till your little heart pitter patter. You know.
Okay, but it would still be prostitution.
Yeah, it would still meet that definition of paying money for sexual gratification.
Okay, if I went to a bar downtown in Harrisburg and saw a couple and I paid them to have sex while I watched, that would still be prostitution, even if they were married?
That's interesting. The short answer is there's no physical contact, right?
Yeah.
So I think, since the penal statutes are to be strictly construed, that you're probably going to find that courts and lawyers are going to argue that it's not prostitution because while we've used the term gratification, we're still going to require some touching because otherwise, and actually these prosecutions have been talked about, and I think a couple of prosecutors out there have tried them, then buying a porn film and paying the actors is probably a form of prostitution too, right?
Okay, now we come to the crux of my whole question here. I got in a discussion with a friend about this. Why aren't porn actors and actresses prostitutes? Because they're being paid to have sex.
Right, and that's the argument. But the person paying isn't really doing it for their gratification. They're doing it so they can resell the art that's created.
Art being in the eye of the beholder.
That's true.
Okay.
But I posted on my Facebook, there's a decision out of New York State that now says that lap dances are not artistic, have no artistic value, and therefore they can be taxed with sales tax. And and it was a split decision, but the one judge, a woman writing the dissent, said, hey, I read the New Yorker, and I don't read Hustler for a reason because I don't want to see it, but I also don't think that the state should be able to exempt the New Yorker from a tax that it applies to Hustler.
Okay. Well, I guess there's nothing the government won't stoop to get money.
To get money, right. And somebody want to know, do you now have to take $1.06 to and I said, no, they just need to lower the price to 94 cents and collect the tax with it.
Okay. You do know that the federal government once owned a whorehouse in Nevada.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, they foreclosed on it for taxes, and they couldn't even make a profit out there. But now, my comment, recently before the state Supreme Court exercised judicial cowardice and kicked the voter ID law back to the lower court, all the narrative on it was that there were 6 judges, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and that unless one of the Republicans sided with the Democrats, it would be a tie and the law would stand.
Right.
My comment is, if we have reached a point where we not only expect but accept that judges will decide cases not based on legal merit but based on political ideology, can we still call ourselves a nation of laws?
Well, that's theoretically, politics plays no role whatsoever in what happens. Okay, so let's look at Bush v. Gore for a second. I read David Boy's biography. In fact, I was just talking about it last night. And in his book, I agree with him about this. There really was no reason for the United States Supreme Court to get involved. That was a state law issue. Florida could do what Florida wanted with certifying their own electors because the states really are supposed to have a lot of power. I always find it people who believe in reserving power to the states, and Bush v. Gore suddenly wanted to reserve a little less power to the states. But I agree with him that historically and based on stare decisis and precedent, the Supreme Court had no business dipping into the Florida election returns. And magically, the court was majority Republicans, and that's exactly how they voted. So other times we see courts that are majority Democrats taking the side of the Democrats. So, yeah, there is a certain, pretendness to this, right? That
yeah.
On the other hand, judges generally do seem to be a little less constrained, and that's why Earl Warren is the Republican governor of California who went on to become one of the most liberal justices that most Republicans ever saw, at least as they would tell you in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah.
So there is some float there, but there's always a predilection to politics in all of the organs. And I think even if you go over to Russia back during the communist era, right after the revolution, it took all of about 13 days before an elite party class created itself and was rewarding itself despite this dogma of all to each equally and from each as they can produce. So I don't know what to tell you, but I think you're right. There's definitely a wink, wink, nod, nod, something wrong with the system. I got to go to break.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
540-0580. Welcome back. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580. Let's finish up some questions this hour here. Let's see. John on the Electoral College. What's going on?
Hello, this is John. The purpose of Electoral College is to have people accountable to the Constitution by especially linking them to that accountability by taking their vote. And therefore, those people are meant to make sure that eligibility had been met at least for the states. And therefore, if all the states did their job, then it would be a national solution.
Okay.
Without that accountability, then people can vote themselves right out of the Constitution.
Right.
That was explained, or it wasn't necessary, but fortunately, Alexander Hamilton explained that in the Federalist Papers as well.
All right. Do you do Facebook at all?
My wife does, and I stay in touch with her whenever she's doing anything on Facebook.
Gotcha. I was just wondering if you could shoot something over which portion of the Federalist Papers to my Facebook page so we could all check it out.
Oh, sure. Would that be easy if I were to look at your Facebook?
Yep. Just post it on there.
Okay.
All right, brother.
Thanks.
540-0580. Let's say, Steve, you have a question.
Yeah, I got a question on savings bonds.
Yes.
My father passed away about a couple weeks ago, and he had a security box. And before he passed away, I opened it, and he had about $130,000 in $1,000 increments in savings bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And he passed away right after that, about a week or so after that. So what I did was I took those to the bank, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to liquidate them and then put them into an account. And the guy at the bank told me the only way he can do that is if he puts it into like an escrow account and be able to distribute that way. If he puts it in an escrow account, it's going to get taxed by the government as being, an inheritance on that.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to avoid the inheritance tax. So I'm thinking I only have a couple options I can do is either I get like 60% of them, and my two brothers get 20% each. What I'm thinking of doing is just splitting them up, sending them to each person, and let them deal with them, on their own.
Yes.
And,
theoretically, did you take possession of him before he died?
Correct. Yeah, I got him out of there before he died. Yeah.
And he gave him to you as a gift before he died?
Well, I'm the only son that took care of his estate and everything. I'm basically the executor, and I was, in charge of the estate and everything the whole way through.
Right.
And according to his will, he wanted me to have 60% of them, then he wanted my two brothers to have 20%
right.
each.
Well, they're assets of the estate, so unfortunately you do have to pay an estate tax on them.
Mm-hmm.
If they were given away prior to his death, it's possible that they were no longer assets of the estate.
Right.
So that's your conundrum.
Right, because I could stand and say that they were given away as a gift, and the government can't really dispute it because they can't really ask him because he's already passed away.
Well, but more importantly, delivery was made, right?
Yeah. So I got him out. The reason I got him out of there is because I know if you leave him in a safety deposit box and they open that box up after he dies, they'll automatically report that to the government.
Right.
So what I did was I got him out of there before he died, so they wouldn't know about it. But the people at the bank wanted me to stick it into an escrow account, and I figured, well, if I put it into an escrow account, I'm still going to go through the same crap with the government, and they're still going to tax me as being an inheritance if I put it through that way.
And you better hope that the people at the bank don't report you to the people at the government, because that's...
Well, yeah, well, the thing is, they said if I cash in anything over $10,000, they have to report to the government.
Right.
So what I'm thinking of doing is just taking them in and cashing them maybe like $5,000 every other week or something, or every couple of weeks, and take them in that way.
Well, that's a federal crime. That's a federal crime to structure a transaction to avoid the reporting limit.
Oh,
and
it is.
their computer software will catch that anyhow.
Mm-hmm. Even if I did it in small increments, I
got
away with
that. Did you hear what I just said? It's a federal crime to do that. It's a felony all by itself.
Coming and going.
Yeah. Well, where it's going is you should pay 4.5% tax with a 5% discount for doing it within 6 months of your father's death, and you can net out expenses of funeral, et cetera, et cetera. But it does sound like you do have a probate asset that you need to probate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a lawyer's going to tell you, my friend. All right?
Yeah. Okay. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless him. Oh my. So see, then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to fraudulent. What? Okay, line two. Dwayne,
well, name one thing that the federal government does that's not a fraud. But anyway, that kind of a scenario. The show that was on for you when they went off the air, they talked about that rich dad, poor dad, which basically was fraud and lies, trying to hustle money out of people. Right. And that was advertised on WHP and Clear Channel a lot. So WHP should be held reliable for advertising a fraud real fact, especially when some of their programs say, well, the advertisers on this program or radio station supports your values or whatever, however, I'm not sure the exact wording is, so go out and buy their product. So they're encouraging people to go to this guy's seminars and buy his books, which are all based on lies.
Well, I hear what you're saying. The short answer is whether it's actionable or not, I don't know. Usually, generally speaking, you're not responsible for advertising content as long as it's clear it's an advertisement.
Yeah.
So that's the general rule.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
All right. See ya.
Tony, you're on the air. No. Tony, you're on the air.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, my stepbrother called and said that his father had died, and my mother was married to him many years ago. They were divorced many years ago, but she was still on his life insurance policy as a beneficiary. Now, her being passed away, does my brother and I inherit what she had as a beneficiary?
Okay, so it's your mother?
Yes.
And she's deceased, but she was the beneficiary in a will?
Yes.
And it depends what the will says. If the will just names her as, say, one of several children who are going to get something, then we would presume it's per stirpes and it goes to her kids in equal shares.
Okay.
So,
because I had a stepbrother and he won't give me the information.
Yeah, it might be time to sit down with a lawyer. If you want to find us, go to Rominger Law, ROMINGER law.com, or call the office at 717-241-6070. Law office number is 717-241-6070. I'll see you guys later.